Scamming is a multi-billion-dollar industry that is creative and evolving. The National Consumer Protection Week is geared towards education, and the National Slam the Scam Day focuses specifically on government imposter scams. Today's guest is Anthony A.J. Monaco. AJ currently serves as a special agent in charge of the Major Case Unit at the Social Security Administration Office of Inspector General. His unit investigates complex fraud cases with particular emphasis on Social Security Administration, imposter scams, and organized fraud rings. AJ has over 30 years of combined federal law enforcement, Marine officer, and legal experience. I'm your host, Chris Parker, and this is the Easy Prey Podcast. AJ, thank you so much for coming on the Easy Prey Podcast today.
Great to be here, Chris. Thanks for having me.
So can you give myself and the audience a little bit of background about who you are and what you do?
Sure thing. So I'm the special agent in charge of at the Social Security Administration, the Office of Inspector General, and I'm in charge of the Major Case Unit. So I've been an agent for almost 20 years now, and I have the privilege of managing this group of individuals, of attorneys and agents and analysts who investigate major frauds related to the Social Security Administration, and including imposter fraud. So I've been doing this, not necessarily imposter fraud, but I've been in federal law enforcement since 2004. Before that, I was in the Marine Corps for almost a decade.
So out of curiosity, what got you interested in going into kind of the investigative side of things and managing that?
Well, it's interesting. When I got out of the Marine Corps in 2000, I really wanted to be a prosecutor. So I went to law school and I did everything right to become a prosecutor. I even had a job, but when I had a job offer anyway. And while I was working at the U.S. Attorney's Office as an intern, I started working with agents. And I thought, you know what, I can do that. And I found out that agents and prosecutors are, paid about similarly, and it's a lot more fun going out and arresting bad guys. I want to give a shout out to the federal prosecutors out there, but they do a lot of hard work behind the desk, and my bent was really towards action, towards being out in the field, being on the street, whatever you might call it. But I was able to parlay that into, and it's not uncommon to have lawyers in federal law enforcement. So rather than go down the route of becoming a prosecutor, I became a Secret Service agent. And from there, got into the Inspector General community after about 7 years. But in all of that, there's lots of investigative activity, and some people might not know that the Secret Service investigates on their investigative side. They've got the kind of the dual mission, protection and investigation, but they are kind of leaders in financial fraud. So that's really how I got into investigating fraud.
Interesting. So when we talk about like imposter fraud, we're specifically referring to people presenting themselves as if they're working for the government or representative of the government?
That's right. Holding themselves out to be a government official. And in our case, in the Social Security Administration, which is a large portion of a government imposter fraud, is somebody holding themselves out to be an official from the Social Security Administration, or, and as happens and has happened a lot, somebody from the Inspector General, another agent. We've got lots of agents that do lots of fraud work in the SSA, OIG, and so holding themselves out to be an OIG agent is particularly perilous for the general public.
So let's talk through of kind of what some of these frauds look like and what we could do about them.
Yeah, sure thing. So we can kind of set the stage with the types of things. So let me back up just a little bit. So government imposter fraud really took off probably in 2013, 2014. I mean, there's always been in imposter fraud, right? Everybody makes jokes now about the Nigerian prince, from the 90s, I think it was the 90s, the late 90s, early 2000s. So, that's a good thing that we all joke about it now, but that's morphed, right? The criminals, the imposters have become much more adept at socially manipulating us in various scams. So the types of scams that really took off in the 2013, 2014 era was the IRS scam. So a lot of people in this country pay taxes. So a criminal could foreseeably hit and touch a large percentage of the population with this scam. So that in the 2018, 2019 era, switched to an even bigger population of people hoping to touch and concern to get access to Social Security beneficiaries. So on the Social Security side, we have the retirement type benefits, and then we have disability benefits. So we give up, I don't know the number of people that we touch, but it's more than taxpayers. Mm-hmm. But we give out over $1 trillion a year. SSA gives out over $1 trillion a year. So you've got a large base to hit. And even if you hit a fraction of those people, you're very likely you have high percentages of hitting somebody who has a Social Security number, right? So your scam is going to work a much greater percentage of the time. So that's kind of government scams writ large. For Social Security fraud or Social Security imposter fraud, what we see a lot in the baseline scam, and I think it's really important to note that the scams evolve, and they evolve in the way that business evolves. These are very bright people, and I think we do ourselves a disservice to underestimate the scammers because they evolve and they take notice of human nature. But the initial scams were, I get a call, I get a text, maybe even an email, or I think those are the primary ones. And later, actual physical letters come in. What's old is what's new now. But call, text, or email, right? And it says that there's a problem, right? And that's we'll talk about the 4 Ps in a moment. But there's a problem with your Social Security number, and at first glance, nobody wants that. It's the same kind of thing now with the scams with the Amazon scams, right? Oh, your Amazon account has been locked, and that's an immediate problem that's realistic. So that's your Social Security number has been identified, associated with, and the most common one was some sort of drug activity or illegal activity on the border. And in order to fix that, you have to do something. And of course, you got to do it right now. And you got to start moving money for safekeeping while we fix, using air quotation marks, while we fix your Social Security number. And then therein proceeds the parade of horribles where we're moving money somehow, some way, gift cards, wire transfers, some way over to other accounts, which end up being controlled by, money mules, bad guys, handlers. And then it makes its way out of your bank accounts and into the stream of criminal commerce. So that's a basic, scamology, if you will. Mm-hmm. And then what we've seen recently in the idea of scammers getting more complex is they really do pay attention to the news, right? They pay attention to our websites. They'll pose as one of us. I've even had my LinkedIn account copied, or my name. I've been used in an attempt to try to pose as a Social Security Administration OIG law enforcement official, as have almost all the senior officials in OIG because their names are on the website, mm-hmm. and several people in just the Social Security Administration itself. So they'll do that. And then one of the things we've seen recently is, and they've done this with increasing sophistication, is I will present you through email, text, generally email or text, with a copy of some credential, some sort of official looking thing that's typically photoshopped. It's a pretty good Photoshop. And if you're not used to looking at federal badges and federal credentials for law enforcement, you might think that some of these things are very real. But, the reality is that in federal law enforcement, not only do we not do that, we're not allowed to do that, to present our credentials to you by text or email. So that's one technique, is to try to gain confidence and to show, some level of credibility. And one of the other things we're seeing is, as the government's attempts to combat inflation and to deal with inflation, the cost of living allowances for Social Security go up, and those are automatic. I mean, the Social Security Administration, does that calculation and applies it to the benefits that it gives out. So, but the scammers, knowing that not everybody understands that or knows that, will send you a text or an email, and we've even seen letters with a toll-free number, a fraudulent toll-free number, that you have to call, and then therein starts the process. And they either try to manipulate you by having you provide bank information because they need spurious bank accounts to move money for money laundering, to get that money out of legitimate places into the stream of criminal commerce, or they're just trying to get you to give them money, or they want to steal your identity. One of those three things. So that's kind of what we're seeing now. Trying to think if there's anything else, the letters, and then varying degrees of sophistication with those letters. Now that letters are coming as PDFs, and they're kind of cobbled together different things. But that's really what we're seeing.
I know historically I've always told people, if you get a call from someone claiming to be the IRS, it's or a text message, that's just not how the IRS communicates unless you're already working with somebody. So you can, the only way they're really going to get hold of you is via the U.S. Postal Service. Have the scammers now started to switch over to physical mail, kind of, or back to physical mail?
They have, and apparently they listen to your podcast. They listen to the scam alerts that we put out. We have a very active public affairs group. Even though we're small, they're very active, and we put out scam alerts all the time. So as I was kind of alluding to before, they do their research. And when we went out and said, hey, we'll only get in touch with you by sending you a letter, well, they decided to figure out a way, because they're somewhat, the criminal mind is ingenious. They figure out a way to blanket large area codes or large zip codes or large, and we think, just based on some of the intelligence we have, that they're actually able to target certain groups of people, whether that's through lead list vending or the fraudulent use or fraudulent sale of lead lists, which is, I don't know a whole lot about the regulation of lead lists, but I know that we do know from some of the intelligence that they're able to manipulate those lead lists and target certain people. So those letters get to a higher percentage of the people, to whom they might pertain, that they might be relevant. So they were sending, but the problem with the letter is, and I think they're figuring this out, is with the actual physical postal letter is very hard to track. I mean, you dump it in some mailbox somewhere. There's, what are we going to do? There's ways to figure it out, but what happens is they use a toll-free number. And we have means to identify that toll-free number, get in touch with the owner of that toll-free number. And all you have to do is shut down the toll-free number that's in the letter, and then game over for that particular scam. But unfortunately, the toll-free numbers are, they're abundant. There are lots of ways to get a toll-free number. In the companies that vend them, the upstream providers are whoever the providers are that give that where you can buy a toll-free number or lease a toll-free number, they're not necessarily going to have an idea that those are being used fraudulently until somebody reports it.
You got to my next question. Is there a place where people can check if a number is a valid Social Security Administration phone number and report it if it's not?
I don't know. To the first part of your question, I'm not sure how we do that. We can do it internally. The best thing to do, though, is if you suspect that it is, that's a really great question. If you suspect that it is, just report it to us on our website. We have a scam form website. I suspect this is fraudulent, and we're taking a look at. We have ways to take a look at those, but I'm not certain. There's probably a technical answer to that from the outside. But I don't know that off the top of my head.
Are most of the phone numbers used by the Social Security Administration kind of publicly accessible numbers? In such that, like, if you Google the number and it comes back and it doesn't show up on a Google search, then it's probably not a legitimate number.
That's certainly an indication, and that's probably what I would do. And that's kind of a mindset that I would recommend you probably do this for text messages you get from your bank. Is back out, go to a search engine, go to two search engines, and put the number in and see what it comes back. When it comes back to the Social Security Administration, then it's probably legit. But you can do the same thing with a fraudulent number. And if you think it's fraudulent, then report it to us, report it to the Federal Trade Commission, and somebody ultimately will take it down. But they're doing that now. With those letters that went out, and I think they're still doing that. They're doing that just with PDF letters. So you get these letters somehow, some way, and it looks to be legitimate when it comes through the email or the text. But when you dig a little bit behind the number or the identified name on the email, and it's not legitimate. And there's probably somebody out there in some kind of, I don't know if it's Snopes or somebody who's probably identified it as fraudulent as well. That's kind of an indicator. It's a factor in kind of figuring out that the number or the email address is fraud. But they change so often. It's really easy to get a hold of these toll-free numbers. It's a constant process. So that's really, the mindset is more important. In other words, the process that you're talking about to back out, do your own research, not accept anything is, on faith, which is unfortunate. We have to be that way, but that's really the mindset you have to adopt.
Gotcha. Are there any ways we can kind of look, if we receive a document, let's say it's through the mail, that we can have any way of authenticating it? Are there, because I'm not going to recognize the Social Security Administration's seal. I don't know who is and isn't an employee. Are there ways to kind of, if you're just looking at the document, have an idea of whether it's a legitimate document or not?
Yeah, there's some fundamental things, and I don't want to give away too many secrets, but there's some things, but for the general public, there's some things that the scammers don't do, and perhaps because they're coming from, most of these things originate from overseas, and we know from West Africa or the Indian subcontinent, in English speaking, where they speak English and are taught English, and many people speak it very well. With a recognizable accent, but maybe even slightly idiomatic English. So when you get the letters, speak it and write it well. When you get the letters, there will be some fundamental things that are wrong with the letters that should make you say, you know what, this isn't quite right. Like one of the ones that we're seeing now is it just mixes and matches a couple things. So if you grew up in this country, or even if you were naturalized and you had to take the citizenship classes, you would probably know that the Attorney General of Texas, whose name is Ken Paxton, has nothing to do with the Social Security Administration and really the IRS. I mean, they might interact somehow, but they've mixed and matched, and they don't really understand our federal system. So they don't understand the interplay between the states and the federal government. So they'll mix and match all these things, and it makes you scratch your head when you're looking at they're trying to cite codes, and we've seen them with Supreme Court justices. I mean, in that most people understand the basic contours of our government, some of these things just don't make any sense. And then the syntax is off, the structure is off. The folks, maybe should have stayed in school. The scammers might have stayed in school a little bit longer and paid a little more attention in their English classes, because some of these things just aren't right. And you can read it and go, all right, this couldn't have been written by, a government official where there's levels of oversight. So that's the main thing, is just you read the letter and there's just obvious mistakes, punctuation mistakes, idiomatic English, colloquial phrases and things like that. And then just other things that don't make sense. So you don't even need to recognize the seal or not, just to recognize that there are going to be a multitude of mistakes. And I haven't seen one yet that's been even close to as the type of letter that you would get from the IRS or SSA or Health and Human Services. So that's the really big thing.
Yeah, I remember getting a phone call with someone claiming to be from the IRS, and this, I'm Barrister Sheriff Smith, and I'm like, Barrister Sheriff Smith working for the IRS. I'm like, I don't think so.
No, and those are the things. Is again, there are some nuances about the way things work in this country that that they wouldn't know or don't know, and it's very obvious in some of the letters, and you can't necessarily change that. So if that's your introduction into, if that's your draw, that's what you're trying to use to pull a victim in. If you just don't get pulled in the first place because you recognize that letter has got so many mistakes and just is not what you would get. Then you're, that if you can stop it at that step, you're going to be great. Because once they get you in, they're very persuasive. These people are very persuasive in person. And there's been lots of studies on this and lots of experts who've talked about just how persuasive they are once they get past that initial barrier. But fortunately for us, and I think the numbers bear this out, and in the general sense, the scam numbers, particularly for SSA, are in government imposters, are going down. But once they do get in, the median loss is going up. So we're being more successful. The U.S. public is more successful at stopping the scam at the first step, but less successful once they get through the barrier. That's why we put the scam alerts out on our website, and we're so we really want to get the public awareness out, because they don't succeed if they don't get past the first step.
So let's talk about the 4 Ps that will help people to identify and spot scams.
Yeah. So generally stated, and I like to call these the phony fundamentals. And I realize this is a podcast, so phony, trying to use some alliteration, PHONEY, phony, and then fundamentals with a PH as well. But the phony fundamentals, phony being imposter, somebody's going to call you. The first P is pretend. Somebody's going to call you, or purport. Somebody's going to call you to pretend to be, as we talked about earlier, an official from a government agency, or an official from Amazon, or an official from your utility company. Then they're going to state that there's a problem, like with your Social Security number, or with your tax refund, or with your Amazon account. And then, or in the case of a hugely successful scam, the romance scams, I think, which you probably talked about a good deal on your podcast, there's a prize, or a lottery prize, or some kind of thing, romance, lottery, kind of in the same area. There's a prize that you need to claim. The third step is pressure. That's the key element. If anything else, if you don't recognize anything else in the P's, the third step, pressure, they're going to pressure you to do something. It's the hard sell. And then the fourth step, they're going to have you pay in a certain way. And that pay in a certain way, typically by gift cards, by wire, even now cryptocurrency, or PayPal, or sometimes used to be cashier's checks. We had a big ring with just putting, what's old is new, putting cash in a box and sending it, because those are very hard to trace. So pay in a specific way that is not the way the government would have you pay. So those are the 4 Ps: pretend to be somebody, problem or prize, pressure, and pay.
So what are some of I think everyone kind of gets the potential problems and the officials. What are some of the pressure techniques that they use?
So specifically for Social Security, and probably the same for IRS, is something is going to happen to you. I mean, and it's in they're really threats. They're onerous threats. They're threats that involve, arrest or seizure of your bank account, seizure. I mean, things that none of us wants to have. Now, if you understand anything about the system, it's just not going to happen. No federal agent or no local agent is going to call you and threaten you with an arrest. I mean, if they have probable cause, which is right out of the Fourth Amendment of the Constitution, they're going to get an arrest warrant and come to your house if you did something wrong. But so nobody's going to call you and say, if you don't give us this information, if you don't start moving money, we're going to arrest you, or we're going to seize your bank account. It just doesn't happen that way. So that's the big pressure. They play on fears that we all have. I mean, very natural fears. Nobody wants to get arrested. Nobody wants to have their bank account seized.
In what ways does the federal government not accept payment? So if someone says, I think the classic one is, for anyone, if anyone says you need to pay your bill with gift cards, that is an immediate hang up the phone. What other ways does the U.S. government not accept payment? So if you hear this word, it's a clear sign.
Yeah. So wire fraud, the big ones are going to be gift cards, obviously, and that's a huge problem. Gift cards, big red flag, like you said, hang up the phone. Wire transfers, as far as I know, and as far as we can tell, that nobody pays by wire. The government's not going to ask you to pay by wire transfer or, internet type things, PayPal. Certainly not cryptocurrency. We haven't gotten to that point now, but and maybe at some point we will. But I don't know about with the stability of cryptocurrency. I'm not sure that that's going to happen, or instability. And so those are the things. And generally, I don't think the government even accepts cash. But the way, in flip that, the converse of that is the government generally will want you to pay by personal check. So it it knows who you are, so the name on the check, or I suppose cashier's check, but most commonly, I know when I write a check to the IRS, that it's my personal check, but also pay.gov.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a completely vetted, encrypted service that, and you can find that. The other thing is you can find that on the SSA's website. You can find it on, I assume, just every government's website with whom, I know you can pay for like national park passes in pay.gov. There's all sorts of things when you have to, conduct business with the government. It's one of the preferred ways to do it. So any one of those kind of off the wall things, gift cards especially, but they were really successful with gift cards. The scammers were, even with with the government ones. You wouldn't think, that people would necessarily fall for that. But again, once you get past that first step, they're very, very convincing at coming up with a ruse as to why you should pay by gift cards.
Yeah, the only scam that I've heard of that in my mind works with gift cards is when someone scams and pretends to be the boss or the boss's boss and says, hey, I want to give out gift cards at the next meeting for the top 10 employees. Can you run out to the store and go grab them for me? Like that one is at least potentially plausible.
Well, and I'm glad you mentioned that because, I believe in eating a piece of humble pie. I didn't fall for the scam, but I got one of those from the pastor of my church and didn't, and this goes to another very important point about taking the hesitation step and just slowing down. We're all running at 100 miles an hour in American life for various reasons, but slowing down and taking what I call the hesitation step and looking at the email, looking at the text and going, what am I seeing here? But I got an email, pretending to be my first step, to be the pastor in my church. And he said, hey, just wonder if you could do something for me. I'd like to recognize the volunteers in the church, and I'd like to give them some gift cards. And that was the second email. The first email was pretty innocuous, and I wasn't particularly paying attention. And I go, yeah, sure. What do you need? And then the gift card sale came, and I went, oh, hey, so it happens to everybody, right? So I didn't fall for it, but you're exactly right. The gift cards are they're so damaging, and they use those, to once they get those gift cards, it's very difficult. The big box stores do a great job. And they're getting better. We partner with them with our National Slam the Scam Day, but those gift cards are really tough. Because they move and you buy things, particularly on the West Coast, the scams we're seeing, once you buy electronics, and then those electronics are then resold, on the black market. So it's a money laundering device, really hard to trace. But yeah, that's a very typical scam.
So I'm kind of curious with your guys' investigations, if you're allowed to talk about past investigations which have already concluded and been charged and stuff and are not in the works. Are you seeing more individuals conducting the scams, or are they criminal organizations conducting the scams?
So we generally, it's the latter, it's the organizations, but that may be because that's what we focus on in the major case unit at SSA-OIG. And that's kind of in the federal government. If you look at the way the way we're organized is we're trying to go up a notch. It's like with the DEA, the DEA is not doing, not necessarily, they're trying to work their way up into the drug cartels, right? And to stop the flow into the country. Whereas your local police are dealing with, traffic in the cities and the municipal traffic, so drug traffic. So we're the same way. We're trying to work our way into the rings, up the rings, arrest the rings, and find our way, all the way overseas in federal law enforcement. So no secret there. You can go read any number of Department of Justice press releases, and we're always trying to, our favorite tool, again, you can see this in the press release, is conspiracy to commit money laundering, conspiracy to commit wire fraud, bank fraud, and mail fraud. So we use those tools that the federal government gives us, that Congress has given us, to really try to do our best. And we also have great jurisdiction so that we can get, we can find guys in 5 different states, find the bad guys, the scammers in 5 different states, and put them all in one case. And that's kind of the way we operate.
So what is the largest scam that you guys have been able to shut down?
Well, we've got a lot of things in progress here. So, we've got one that you can read about where again, it's a matter of press release. We've got 10. I think we took down 10. There's more. A ring of 10, scammers, if you will, in more than just the bottom level is what they call the money mules, the handlers, the guys that are actually doing the hand to hand or moving things from bank account to bank account. And typically, we'll get some of those, but what we're really looking for is the guys controlling the rings all around the country. So we've had some success in the tens. If you look around the community, there's been some really big ones. There was one, again, a matter of public record called Operation Outsource out of the Southern District of Texas, which is kind of one of the granddaddies of all imposter cases, IRS. I want to say there were 60 defendants, a lot of them overseas. So when we're looking at something to kind of, answer this in a slippery sort of way, when we're looking at something, we're looking in the, the dozens range or more. We're trying to, so we're still pretty new, had some successes. Generally we've had some in various districts that are typically, well, they're all over the place, but we've had some success in the Southern District of Texas and the the Northern District of Georgia, which is Atlanta, where they have these, and they're all over now. And the Department of Justice is growing, adding offices to their strike force, their elder fraud strike force. I think it's called, elder fraud strike force, transnational elder fraud strike forces. So we're up to 20 or so. But some of the leaders that I've seen, you've got California, the Central District, which is LA. You've got Houston, for that part of Texas, and in Southern District of New York is always a big leader in imposters. But generally, when you're looking at those, ours included, the Treasury Inspector General for Tax Administration, those guys that we work with, Homeland Security Investigation, Secret Service. You're looking at, they come out in dribs and drabs. That's the problem, is you might indict a handful here, a handful there. But when you piece them all together, you're looking at dozens, and that's where we've had some success. You just keep going. You just keep, peeling back the onion. And after a time, you put it all together, you've got, dozens, or in the case of Operation Outsource, you're in the 60s.
So what is the likelihood that someone who's been scammed out of their money will get it back if you guys are able to find the scammers?
So two parts to that, and this really deserves a PSA, public service announcement, as part of that, because initially the way that federal law enforcement works is we have to go through the whole investigation. We've got to find the money. A lot of times that money is gone, and that's the problem. If you can prevent it from going into the stream of criminal commerce in the first place, that's a win. But even if it's there, we'll get, I don't even know if we're getting pennies on the dollars. We have to go through a seizure process, a legal process that ends up with, contested sometimes in civil, sometimes in criminal court, generally known as asset forfeiture. And that takes a long time. So it may be, if we can get it back, it may be years. But that brings me to the public service announcement, is that the FBI, they have lots of resources, and we work with them all the time. And we work with all the federal law enforcement partners all the time. The FBI, in their Internet Crime Complaint Center, or in and around it, they have a recovery asset team. So if you can get your, complaint, your matter, if you will, your loss to them within, I don't know if they have an established time frame, but generally, especially if it's I think it's wire transfers. If you've transferred money and you realize you've been scammed, if you quickly get to them and send them a complaint, go to their website, IC3, I think it's .gov, but it's the Internet Crime Complaint Center. They have a process, and they've been very successful at clawing back money, freezing accounts and freezing wire transfers and stopping that. So I mean, just looking at some numbers that I've seen that they've got, hundreds of millions of dollars that they've been able to freeze or claw back through that process because they've got the analysts, they've got the people working in that space to work with the financial institutions. We, on the other hand, if you send us a complaint, we're just, we get hundreds of thousands of complaints, or at least 100,000 complaints now, but we were up in the 800,000 range, at the height of Social Security fraud. And it's just, there just aren't enough of us to be able to do that kind of work. So, so somebody's doing a good job at that. And it's the FBI through the IC3, the Internet Crime Complaint Center, where they're clawing back, hundreds of millions of dollars and able to work with financial institutions to do that. So some success there, but if we don't get to it within the first day or two, or maybe three, we being federal law enforcement, it's very unlikely that we can get that money back. It's a long, arduous process that we have to go through, and demonstrate that we have the level of proof that these are proceeds. And we're, just to be very candid, that process is not particularly good because a lot of that money is overseas and it's gone.
Yeah. And I guess that leads to the warnings of people claiming to be able to recover your lost funds from scams is usually a secondary scam, unfortunately.
Yeah, I would say so. And it's interesting. I've not studied that a whole lot, but I would, if you put your security mindset on, I would be very suspicious of somebody being able to do that.
Yeah, it's one thing if you've reported it to IC3 within a couple of days, within a day or 24 hours, and you're getting a response back versus someone just coming to you out of the blue and saying, hey, we can help you get your money back. It's probably not going to happen.
It's probably a co-conspirator of the original scam, trying to really, and that's the heart-wrenching thing, is to see somebody not just scammed once, but scammed twice and three times and just multiple times, victimized over and over again. I mean, you don't have to see that more than once it's just such a heart-wrenching thing to see people undergo that, especially when they're elderly, when they're in their 70s, and they just don't have the ability to make it up, through they don't have the years and the ability to go back to work and make up that money they lost.
Yeah, it's just particularly tragic.
It is.
Earlier, you were talking about, you mentioned the National Slam the Scam Day. What is that, and what are you guys doing for that?
All right, great. I'm glad you asked that. So what we realized probably when we got into the scam world, the SSA scam world, we realized in kind of encapsulated by this idea, not necessarily this particular incident, but we all understood, and as one prosecutor in Department of Justice told me, is we're not going to prosecute our way out of this, right? So it's a component. It's a very important component, and we know that it works. But there's a lot of other things that we can do to kind of defeat this multi-billion dollars. All the estimates I've seen have been, some in the single digits of billions to the multi-billions of dollars lost, particularly in the area of elder fraud. I think the IC3 estimated, the last number I saw was $3.1 billion for 2022 for elder fraud. And that's all sorts of elder fraud, but there's in the Venn diagram, elder fraud and imposter fraud have a massive overlap. So because the age groups that are hit hardest are typically that 60 and above, 60 to 69, and the Federal Trade Commission looks at them in kind of 10 years groups, and we just see that number is going up and up and up. The median loss is getting higher and higher as you get older for reasons that people are looking into. Academics are studying this stuff. But what we knew we could do is, and credit to our public affairs. And again, we're small. The Inspector General's office is, somewhere north of 500 people. But we have a very robust, and the Inspector General, Gail Ennis, had dedicated significant resources to our communications, our press and communications, and our media people. And in 2020, so it's the fourth year now, but the first year was in 2020, we started this National Slam the Scam Day, and kind of blitzing social media and getting out on interviews and podcasts like this to try to raise awareness to help people combat. And it's not just the people who might be prospective victims. It's anybody who might know somebody because we know from, just being human beings on this earth that word of mouth works really well.
Yeah.
So, whoever we reach through our social media accounts, through, we've got Facebook and Twitter and LinkedIn, whoever we can reach, might pass that along oh yeah. And we want to go the way of the Nigerian prince. We want these things to be so obvious, right? That everybody's like, oh, that social security scam. Man, that's kind of funny, right? We just want these things to be dead and gone. And while the prosecutive component works very well, and we know that from talking to criminals after we arrest them, that word doesn't necessarily get out really fast. It doesn't get out as fast as we want it to, and then they're always changing their scams. So in 2020, we started this thing, and last year we expanded it to include other government imposter scams, and we're working with the Federal Trade Commission, the Federal Communications Commission. We've worked with nonprofits, AARP, you name it, big box stores, all sorts of people to try to just get the word out and blanket, the social media and regular media as much as we can as a small agency to get the word out about these imposter scams. I should add that this is, it's March 9th this year, and it's also part of the larger, the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission's National Consumer Protection Week, which is all next week. So we're kind of smack dab in the middle of all that, all this kind of effort to really help protect consumers and alert them about scams.
And so where can people go if they want to learn more about the campaign and read up and kind of get a better understanding?
It's part of the broader Federal Trade Commission's National Consumer Protection Week, which goes from the 5th of March to the 11th of 2023, so this week. And we're targeting government and SSA scams on March 9th. So all the information about Slam the Scam is there at that website, our website.
Awesome. We'll make sure to put that in the show notes so it's easy for people to find and click on and read more about it. And we'll also include it in some of our social media posts for that week as well.
Fantastic. We appreciate that. And we need all the help we can get to get the word out.
Any other parting advice before we wrap up today?
Yeah, I was thinking about a couple of things. There's multi layers, right? There's this. We're not successful in reducing this scam to just kind of a has been, unless a lot of people are working at it. And I just want to give a shout out to the folks in law enforcement, the guys that I work with, the folks that I work with, and the prosecutors. Keep doing what you're doing. We're making a difference. An interesting thing. There are people involved. I'm seeing this more and more. The people that are in and around. So, my parents are older. Those of us, the 40 somethings, 50 somethings, 60 somethings that have elderly parents or grandparents or, aunts and uncles. Keep a lookout for them, because we know that cognitively they are more susceptible to this. So keep a lookout for folks. It's a big part of stopping these scams. If somebody just breaks that chain of those 4 Ps. And this, I'd say just in general for all of us, take the hesitation step. If you don't get into that 4 Ps at all, if you just hang up, you're never going to get scammed. But the hesitation step, especially with the pressure, if you just step back and say, what am I looking at? Then you're going to be very successful. So, I think we're doing a good job. We need to continue, as a society. The Department of Justice has recognized that this is a multi-billion-dollar fraud loss to people. It's a very serious issue, but it's something that we all need to kind of pull together. There's all sorts of components where everybody can help. Your podcast, a great example. We need to get the word out and just stop this, because as we said earlier, that seeing somebody in later stages of life having lost hundreds of thousands of dollars or even $20,000, just losing money that they can't make up and become, potentially being destitute for the remainder of their life is just such a heart-wrenching thing. So we can stop that. We can do a good job if we kind of work together and get the word out there.
Yep, that's exactly what the podcast is about. AJ, thank you so much for coming on the Easy Prey podcast today.
Hey, great to be here, Chris. Thanks for all the great work you do.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Easy Pray podcast. If you found something in this episode helpful, please share it with a friend and leave a review at easypray.com/review. Notes and a transcript of this episode with AJ Monaco can be found at easypray.com/158.